we take fire as a matter of course. It lights our cigarettes, cooks our food, warms our homes, serves industry, and performs 1,000 other vital tasks. And starting a fire nowadays is a simple matter. To us, it's no problem at all. To the men of ancient times, however, the art of making fire was as important and as difficult as life itself. One method was to strike together two stones, one of flint, the other containing iron in some form. Another method produced fire by rubbing two pieces of wood, one against the other. While the people of southeastern Asia many years ago learned to make fire by compressed air, using an extraordinary contrivance known as the fire piston or fire syringe. This consisted of a hollow tube, closed at one end, and a round stick, which could be inserted into the top of the tube. Tinder was placed usually at the bottom of the round stick. Then when this stick or plunger was driven down quickly, the tinder took fire and burned. Repeating this action slowed down, let's see what happens inside this fire-making apparatus. As the round stick or plunger moves down the tube, the air in the tube is trapped, confined to a smaller and smaller space, and finally the tinder at the end of the plunger ignites. Result, fire through compression. But why? To find the answer to this question, let's construct a modern fire syringe. Turn the apparatus upside down and put a couple of thermometers in convenient places. These thermometers will record the room temperature, and the other will register the temperature of the air inside the cylinder. Next, we add an instrument for measuring the air pressure inside the cylinder. And now we've transformed the primitive fire-making device into a modern scientific apparatus. The pressure gauge reads 0, and both thermometers are at room temperature, 74 degrees. Now we start compressing the air. As the piston goes up, the pressure rises. The temperature outside of the cylinder remains the same, but inside the cylinder, the more the air is compressed, the higher the not enough to boil water. Higher and higher go temperature and pressure. Now it's hot enough to melt tin. Until finally, the air in the cylinder is compressed into about 1/16 of the space it occupied before we started compressing it. At this point, the pressure and the temperature of the air inside the cylinder are extremely high. And if a mist of oil could be sprayed into it, here's what would happen. Now let us repeat this action in slow motion. Oil is sprayed into the cylinder. It catches fire and burns. Temperature and pressure increase, driving the piston downward. And so we've seen demonstrated a basic scientific principle, the fact that when air is compressed, it gets hot. Now let's pause to examine another basic scientific principle, one which is best understood through an experiment. A piece of rubber sheeting is stretched over the mouth of a glass container. The glass is heated, and the rubber sheeting puffs out like a balloon. This is because air expands when it is heated. So now, let's apply this second principle. First, the air in the cylinder becomes hot from compression. Then it's heated to a much higher temperature by the burning oil, increasing the pressure so it pushes the piston down. Now, let's convert this apparatus into a mechanism which will apply these two scientific principles in such a way as to provide useful energy. First, let's take away the pressure gauge and the thermometers and strengthen the walls of the cylinder to withstand continued high temperatures and pressures. Now we'll need a couple of pipes or manifolds, one to bring fresh air into the cylinder and the other to carry the burned gases out of it. Also a couple of valves to cork the air in the cylinder while it's being compressed and while the oil burns. Next, we install a better atomizer, which we will call the Injector Unit. Then, in order to transform the up and down motion of our piston into more convenient turning motion, we replace the piston rod with a crankshaft and connecting rod. But one thing more is needed something which will keep speed uniform between power impulses. So we add a heavy flywheel. And to protect and support our apparatus, we add a housing and a base. Now, let's see how this mechanism works. First, the intake valve opens, and as the piston moves downward, fresh air is drawn into the cylinder. Now the intake valve closes, tightly corking the air in the cylinder, and we drive the piston upward on its compression stroke. The injector unit sprays fuel oil into the top of the cylinder. The oil burns, pushing the piston down. Now the exhaust valve opens, the piston moves up, and the gases resulting from the burned oil are forced out. This is called a four-stroke or four-cycle diesel engine because it has 4 strokes to each cycle. Exhaust, intake, compression, power, exhaust. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. One of the most interesting and important parts of our engine is the atomizer or injector unit. Let's see why. The diesel engine operates on a compression ratio of 16:1. As we've seen, this means that the air inside of the cylinder is compressed into 1/16 of the space it normally requires, building up a pressure of 500 to 600 pounds per square inch. Against this tremendous pressure, the injector unit must drive fuel into the cylinder with such force that it spreads almost instantaneously to all parts of the combustion chamber. Here's how the injector unit works. First of all, it's made up of a pump, an injection valve, and the injector nozzle. The injector pump presses down on the oil until it reaches a pressure of from 15 to 20,000 pounds per square inch, allowing a small quantity of oil to pass through the injector nozzle into the cylinder. The fuel must burn quickly, so it's pushed into the cylinder through tiny holes in the injector nozzle, which are no bigger than the diameter of a small needle. These break it up into a fine fog or spray. And so efficient is this remarkable mechanism that it forces oil through the highly compressed air in the cylinder at a rate of over 600 miles per hour. That's almost twice as fast as the fastest racing cars, and even faster than the fastest airplanes. The injector unit also controls the speed of the diesel engine. The more fuel oil sprayed into the cylinder, the greater its speed, and the amount of fuel entering the cylinder is varied by a sliding bar which is connected to the throttle of the engine. This bar engages a gear which is attached to the plunger of the injector pump, so that when the bar is moved back and forth, the pump plunger turns. And so the turning action of the plunger increases or decreases the effective stroke of the pump, thus varying the amount of fuel entering the cylinder. In other words, the injector unit is called upon to do a big job in a very small amount of space and time. It's able to do that job only because of the amazing precision with which it's fitted together, and every unit must pass this exacting test on a machine which checks accuracy to millionths of an inch. To illustrate the precision required in the manufacture of the injector unit, let us place a human hair under a microscope. Now suppose that hair were split into about 125 equal parts. 1/125th of that hair is equal to the clearance between the plunger and the barrel of the injector unit pump. This remarkable device was the result of the activities of many scientists and engineers working to solve the problem of properly injecting the fuel into the cylinders. It's made up of many finely machined parts, turned from the best steel available by a highly skilled workman. The injector unit must not fail. It's indeed the heart of the diesel engine, and it must pump oil into the cylinder many thousands of times during each hour of operation. And to successfully perform this job, it must be as nearly perfect as it can be made. The first diesels had only one cylinder, but it was found that one-cylinder diesel engines could not provide sufficient power for most operations. So more cylinders were added. There were 2-cylinder engines, 3-cylinder, 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder engines, engines with 8 and even 12 cylinders. For many purposes, the four-stroke or four-cycle diesel engine was the most efficient and the most economical engine in existence. But the great weight and size of the engine was not needed for the intake and exhaust strokes. Yet the engine spent half its time merely pumping air in and out of the cylinders. How could they eliminate the pump strokes? That was the problem the engineers set out to solve. And research and experiment resulted in the development of a pump or blower to take the place of those two pump strokes. This innovation called for an important change in the engine, for now it was necessary to move the intake manifold down so it encircled the base of the cylinder. And fresh air was forced in by the blower through a number of openings in the cylinder wall. The intake opening in the top of the cylinder was no longer needed. So during the fraction of a second that the piston was at the bottom of its stroke, the new pump or blower forced clean air in at the bottom of the cylinder, and the clean air rushing in forced the burned gases out through the exhaust valve at the top of the cylinder, so that every time the piston went up, it compressed air, and every time it went down, it provided power. Our engine had become a two-stroke or two-cycle diesel engine. Compression, power, compression, power. And so the two-stroke diesel engine furnished almost twice as much power as a four-stroke diesel engine, the same size, because it had twice as many power strokes. And now let's have a look at the pump or blower, which has made our two-cycle diesel possible. The two rapidly turning rotors of the blower, which are now seen in slow motion, trap the air between themselves and the wall of the blower, forcing the air through into the cylinder. It was found that for greatest efficiency, the rotors should be curved in this unusual fashion. But machining the rotors in this way presented a problem because every inch of the outside surface of the rotors had to fit exactly to the blower walls. These problems were solved, however, and as a result, the two-cycle or two-stroke diesel engine became an accomplished fact. This new engine was smaller. It weighed less per horsepower. The four-cycle engine was still extremely valuable for certain types of installations, but where more power per pound of engine weight was needed, the new two-cycle diesel promised great things. And so, testing and experiment continued. The engine was further perfected, until in 1933, research engineers were ready to show the new diesel to the public. At the Century of Progress Exposition in Chicago, two 600-horsepower, two-cycle diesels were placed on display. They created wide interest, and to technical minds demonstrated that this new two-cycle diesel not only operated with unprecedented economy, but was reliable as well. And then in 1934 came proof of performance.
She's the latest thing in trains, diesel-powered and streamlined from end to end. They're getting ready to try her out from Denver to Chicago. And now she's off. Quickly she picks up speed, 70, 80, 90 miles an hour, on her way to shatter almost every railroad record in existence. For it's Denver to Chicago in 13 hours and 5 minutes, introducing a new chapter in the history of transportation.
But that was only the beginning. A few months later, the two-cycle diesel again made news, and more news.
She's brand new, just out of the shop. And this time it's going to be coast to coast, from Los Angeles to New York, and she'll try for a new transcontinental record. Off into the night, piloted by men who know the road. And behind them there's a new kind of power, modern power, from a two-cycle diesel engine. Through the night, and finally through the mists and fogs of early morning. And then into the dawn, over rivers and streams, following that long, shiny ribbon of track. And now our cameraman takes to the air as the streamliner speeds across the plains of the Midwest. This new train is light, complete with all its cars, it weighs less than a single steam locomotive. But it hugs the tracks, and it zips along smoothly and steadily. The line is cleared miles ahead for this new king of the rails. The speedometer reads 90 miles an hour, and our cameraman climbs down between the tracks to prove this streamliner is streamlined from every angle. And then New York, coast to coast in 56 hours and 55 minutes. A new transcontinental record with a new kind of power, two-cycle diesel power.
This new kind of power took hold of the public's fancy. More and more people wanted to ride in these new diesel streamliners. And so 2 years later, public demand brought action.
Railroad locomotives for streamlined trains. And here's where they're made. At Grange, Illinois, General Motors built this plant where they make locomotives of the latest type and design. Here, they're putting the finishing touches on the power plant for a modern streamlined train. For these are a new kind of locomotive. They're light and fast and powerful. And they're sleek and streamlined, pleasing to the eye. They offer a minimum of resistance to the air. Giant cranes set down the stainless steel body of this big engine on its trucks, and soon she'll be ready to go, ready to carry thousands of passengers quickly, comfortably, safely.
Meanwhile, in the General Motors styling section, experts in streamlining and modern design cooperated. Long experience in building automobiles to please the public eye aided these stylists in helping to create trains as beautiful as they were different. Stainless steel exteriors designed for speed and eye appeal. Modern interiors designed for comfort and restfulness. Lounge cars with deep, easy chairs. Indirect lighting and beautiful lines throughout, like some exquisitely appointed modern salon. But the demand for the new two-cycle diesel was not limited to streamlined trains. And April 1937 brought the announcement by General Motors of the formation of a diesel engine division and the construction of a big new plant to produce diesels for small power installations, for trucks, for buses and the like. And meanwhile, the Winton Engine Corporation in Cleveland, a subsidiary of General Motors, continued to lead the field in the production of all types of diesels. Here, as in other General Motors diesel plants, the need for more diesels has brought with it a need for more and more men to build them. And so, the diesel of today has brought employment to supply the ever-increasing demand for this modern power. But the diesel engine is only just beginning to come into its own. And it's full speed ahead for progress, as thousands of Winton diesels provide power for Coast Guard cutters, tugboats, cruisers, yachts, power on the sea as well as on land, modern power. So much for the diesels of today. And now, for the future, here's more news.
I would like to point out that the new diesel engines which we are making today are entirely different from those of the past. It is therefore extremely difficult to use the experience with these older engines to predict the future. In fact, I think it's rather foolish to try to say anything about the future anyhow. Prediction is all right for romance writers, but it's terribly bad for practical engineers. A great many of us can remember when the telephone was quite a new invention. It was a marvel when it was only 5 years old, but it was absolutely impossible for anybody at that time to predict the marvelous worldwide service which we have today. And anybody who took a ride in one of our early single-cylinder automobiles could not possibly have predicted our modern high-speed and luxurious vehicle. There's one question which we are asked almost every day. When am I going to get a diesel engine in my automobile? Well, we can't tell you that, because there are quite a number of problems yet which have to be solved. These are things which take time and they're more questions of time development than of technicality. However, I can say this one thing positively, that you are getting everything that we have today that is worthwhile using, and that we are not holding out anything on you whatever.
Thank you, Mr. Kettering. And so, this modern two-cycle diesel engine is still in its swaddling clothes. But in diesel laboratories, engineers and scientists labor on to find increasingly better fuels, to reduce the weight of the engine and increase its power, to improve the injector unit, to bring you more power at less cost, to bring you faster, cheaper transportation through diesel, the modern power.